On Primetime Asia tonight, Malaysia's largest political party, UMNO's Vice President and former Defence Minister Hishamuddin Hussein says he will not be contesting upcoming party polls.
I've had the chance to meet with Chairman Kim Jong Un twice now.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the North Korean leader has told him he's willing to denuclearise. His comments coming ahead of next week's Trump-Kim summit.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin arrives in China on a state visit as the neighbouring giants forge closer ties in the face of U.S. diplomatic and economic challenges. Hello, I'm Glenda Chong.
And I'm Steve Lai, and Dawn Tan joins us for the business news this evening. And Singapore's sovereign wealth investors joining the next series of funding for China's ant financiers.
Certainly are, Steve. Temasek Holdings and GIC, they're part of a group of investors pumping in about $14 billion into Ant Financial. And that cash injection is going to accelerate Alipay's globalization plans and invest in developing technology.
And we're tracking the top news stories across Asia. On tonight's show, UMNO explores Vietnam's plans for tripling the amount of renewable energy it produces. And Victoria Jenna, she finds out the issues around women in Taiwan freezing their eggs as an option for the future. But first, tonight in Malaysia, where the opposition party UMNO's Vice President Hishamuddin Hussein says he will not be contesting in the upcoming party elections. Mr. Hishamuddin is Malaysia's former defence minister and a member of parliament for Sembrong in Johor. Mr. Hishamuddin is taking responsibility for his party's electoral losses in last month's general election and will not fight for a leadership position. But he will stay in UMNO to contribute towards strengthening the party. And this will be the first time in decades that UMNO is not being served by one of its blue blood families. Now, in the past, there's always been at least one leader carrying the Razak, Hussein or Mahathir name. Mr. Hishamuddin is the son of former UMNO President and Prime Minister Hussein On. Now, Melissa Go has more on what's ahead for UMNO and Barisan Nasional.
These are troubled times for the UMNO-led Barisan Nasional coalition. Its 13 component parties are now turning inwards to save themselves after having suffered their worst electoral defeats on May 9. Sarawak, once considered a safe deposit for BN, its component parties are now mulling to leave the coalition as early as next week. Combined, the 4 component parties, including Pusaka Bersatu Bumiputra or PBB, own 19 out of the 79 seats won by BN in the last elections.
When PBB walks, if it walks away, then definitely Barisan should just dissolve itself and rebrand its coalition.
The PBB's move came after the PH government, led by Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, filed in court to claim full ownership of oil and gas resources in Sarawak, forcing the ruling party in Sarawak to further distance itself from BN.
And this is a big bargaining chip that Dr. Mahathir will leverage on when he is negotiating whether Sarawak state government would want to remain in BN or otherwise. Sarawak is a state which is rich in natural resources, and it will be able to provide Barisan Nasional to assist the rebuilding of the coalition.
Acting UMNO chairman Ahmad Zaid Hamidi met Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir, seen as a desperate attempt to stop BN from crumbling. The MIC and MCA, 2 largest ethnic-based parties in the peninsula, have also signalled their intention to leave BN. This after their leaders were voted out by the people in the recent polls.
And we will see if the reforms happen and we can be relevant to the political challenges of today. That's fine. Otherwise, we will keep our options open for anything else. Thank you.
MCA, that's left with only 1 seat in Parliament, has even blamed UMNO-led BN for the disastrous showing.
I'm not worried the Barisan Nasional break up because we can see some other party did not contribute anything. So what is the point they stay with us? So lagi baik mereka leave barisan elia, then kita tidak ada musuh dalam selimut.
UMNO's acting deputy president said there must be a complete change in BN, as it can no longer be business as usual.
We have to be brave to go into frontiers which we have not charted before, because the Rakyat has spoken. They do not mean that they reject us completely, but they need us to be realistic in that looking forward. There must be something that will be able to give them hope that we are going to change, and we are going to change for the better, not only for Malays, but all Malaysians.
But the 57-year-old former Minister of Defence, who comes from one of the oldest political dynasties in the country, is taking a break from the party's leadership lineup. Now, on Friday, Mr. Hishamuddin announced that he isn't contesting in the upcoming UMNO party election at the end of June, but will remain as a party member and help to rebuild UMNO, starting with its birthplace in the southern state of Johor. That, as the 72-year-old party tries to renew itself and redefine its role in Malaysia's changing political landscape. Melissa Goh, Channel News Asia at the UMNO headquarters, Kuala Lumpur.
North Korean leader Kim Jong Un says he's willing to denuclearize. And that's according to U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who says Washington and Pyongyang have managed to narrow the gap on denuclearization. He made the comments ahead of the closely watched Trump-Kim summit set for Tuesday.
He has indicated to me personally that he is prepared to denuclearize, that he understands that the current model doesn't work, that he's prepared to denuclearize, and that, two, he understands that we can't do it the way we've done it before, that this has to be big and bold, and we have to agree to making major changes. We can't step through this over years, but rather need to acknowledge it will take some amount of time, that this doesn't happen instantaneously, but that the model for succeeding, security assurance and political normalization and denuclearization, completely verifiably and irreversibly, for that to take place, we've got to make bold decisions, and I'm hopeful that Chairman Kim Jong Un is prepared to make that decision for his country, a big shift in his strategic understanding of his security.
Mr. Pompeo also added that while President Donald Trump remains hopeful of a good outcome, he would still walk away if the talks prove unfruitful. Mr. Trump himself seemed optimistic.
Well, it's going to be much more than a photo op. I think it's a process. I've told you that many times before. I think it's not a one-meeting deal.
Singapore's Home Affairs and Law Minister Hishamuddin says it is absolutely in its interests to do what it can to reduce tensions on the Korean peninsula, which could have serious implications on the region. He was speaking on the sidelines of a media briefing about security arrangements for the Trump-Kim summit in Singapore.
It's important, I think, for the whole world, including Singapore, that we help the peace process. You have a nuclear-capable North Korea. You have American troops in South Korea. And saying the obvious, the U.S. is a nuclear state. You have a standoff between the U.S. and DPRK, and you also have a nervous South Korea and Japan. It's a period of tension. And you have China, which has, obviously, interests. If there is any incident, it will be bad for the whole world, in particular Asia. We, Singapore, will be badly affected. So, Singaporean jobs, our trade, our investments, all could be affected.
Mr. Hishamuddin also said the decision to hold the summit in Singapore was a major show of confidence in the city-state, where thousands of officers have been mobilized to provide security. The summit, which will be held at Capella Hotel on Sentosa Island, has been declared an enhanced security special event from the 10th to the 14th of June. So this means there will be roadblocks and stringent security checks around certain venues. Don Tan is also up ahead with the day's business headlines.
That's right, Glenda. Thailand's planning to accelerate some ambitious projects. Yes, Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha is headed to Europe to draw those investors. I'm going to have the details for you in just a bit. Welcome back to Primetime Asia. Your business news now. Singapore's sovereign fund, GIC, and state investor Temasek Holdings have been named as participants in the latest financing round that helped raise around 18.7 billion Sing dollars for China's biggest online payment platform, Ant Financial. Other global investors include U.S. private equity firm Warburg Pincus. Now, the capital raising comes ahead of a widely expected initial public offering by the Chinese firm, though there are no firm details of a timeline nor likely stock exchange it's planning to list on. Ant Financial said the funds would be used to develop new technology as well as boost globalization plans for its Alipay payment platform. Ant Financial was spun off before Chinese tech giant Alibaba went public. The payment platform provides financial services like payment and credit services, as well as wealth management products and microloans. Thailand has announced that it's expediting 6 key investment projects. They're worth some $18.7 billion in its Eastern Economic Corridor. These include a high-speed railway connecting major airports, the extension of 2 deep sea ports, U Tapao Airport, and a digital park. The EEC zone covers Chonburi, Rayong, and Chachoengsao provinces. The government plans to bid out the projects by the end of the year, and the names of the winning investors, well, they will then be submitted for cabinet approval by January, paving the way for construction work to begin. The announcement comes ahead of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha's trip to the UK and France on the 20th to the 25th of June. The Prime Minister is expected to draw more investors after the European Union softened its stance on Thailand's military-backed government. Key ministers have assured diplomats from 56 countries that the projects will not be affected by any political changes after the next election. Some of the stories that we're tracking this hour. Elsewhere, Foxconn Industrial Internet has soared in its Shanghai Stock Exchange debut. It surged by the maximum daily limit of 44% this morning, giving it a market value of $61 billion. That makes it now the largest tech company listed in mainland China. Foxconn has ridden Apple's ascendancy for a decade as its most important production partner. The mega listing is seen as part of Beijing's resolve to lure tech giants onto mainland exchanges. In the US, McDonald's says it's planning an unspecified number of corporate job cuts. It says the move is part of a restructuring drive to save $500 million and boost its US business. According to Wall Street Journal, the fast food giant plans to streamline its management structure, and more details of that will be outlined at a June town hall meeting that takes place next week. And from burgers to chicken, China's Commerce Ministry says it will impose anti-dumping measures on Brazilian broiler chickens from tomorrow. And that's because the imports have substantially damaged the domestic industry. Under the new rules, local firms buying Brazilian chicken will have to make deposits of up to 38%. Brazil accounted for more than 50% of China's broiler product requirements between 2013 and 2016. The move will be another blow to Brazil, which is still recovering from the fallout of a food safety scandal. And I'll be back with more updates later on Primetime Asia. But for now, guys, it's back to you.
Yep, many thanks for that, Dawn. Still plenty more ahead here on Primetime Asia. China hosts Russian President Vladimir Putin on a state visit ahead of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Olivia Song will join us with more.
Welcome back. Warm ties between the two neighboring giants, China and Russia. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin said cooperation between both countries is at an all-time high, while China's President Xi Jinping hailed ties with Russia. And this as he hosted Mr. Putin to a state visit to bring the two nations closer in the face of U.S. diplomatic and economic challenges. Now, in fact, Mr. Xi said that regardless of ups and downs in the international situation, China and Russia have always taken the development of relations a priority. And for more on this, we're joined by our China correspondent, Olivia Seong. So, Olivia, tell us more and, what came out of this latest meet between the two leaders.
Well, Glenda, certainly Russia and China are keen to showcase their strong relationship during Mr. Vladimir Putin's first visit to China since being re-elected for a fourth term in March. Now, this is also since Chinese President Xi Jinping unanimously secured a second term in power when China's parliament convened in March. Now, addressing the media after talks in Beijing, Mr. Xi said Mr. Putin made a fruitful trip, injecting strong momentum into bilateral relations, even as both leaders, noted that during a joint statement and agreed that trade protectionism seems to be rearing its head and global economic growth recovery is facing uncertainties. Of course, this also comes on the back of, looming trade tensions between China and the United States, and also as the United States has labeled China and Russia economic rivals, so certainly China and Russia keen to showcase their united stance. China maintains its status as Russia's largest trade partner, and Mr. Xi noted that both of them have managed to press ahead with several major strategic projects and have also highlighted several new opportunities for cooperation. Of course, they also had to weigh in on the upcoming summit in Singapore between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. Mr. Putin noting that China and Russia both want to see peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asia, and are very happy to see the progress that has been made on the issue based on the route that has been championed by both of them.
Olivia, President Xi also awarded Mr. Putin a friendship medal. It's the first time ever that China has given it out. Tell us a bit about the significance.
Well, certainly very warm words once again, showcasing the strong bilateral ties and also the personal friendship between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian, President Vladimir Putin. Now, this medal is the highest state honor to be given by China to a foreigner and was presented to Mr. Putin in Beijing at the Great Hall of the People by Mr. Xi. Now, Mr. Xi said the medal is presented to foreigners who have made outstanding contributions to China's socialist modernization drive in promoting exchange and cooperation between China and the world and in safeguarding world peace.
Olivia, the two leaders have also sought to strengthen the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and that's a regional grouping that they created, and we know that they're meeting this weekend. What can we expect from it?
Well, Glenda, the next stop of Mr. Putin's trip to China will be right here where I am in the coastal city of Qingdao. That's where Mr. Xi and Mr. Putin will be meeting the leaders of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a regional security group. Now, they will be meeting, and this is the first time that India and Pakistan will.
It was a scene that signaled the easing of tensions when Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Wuhan in May. Their meeting followed a long and tense border standoff last year over disputed territories. Now the two leaders are set to meet again in China, but this time in Qingdao for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Comprising 8 countries and led by China and Russia, it is the first time that India will be taking part in the meetings.
When we decided to accept new members last year, many Western media analysts, they believe there's a major motivation of Russia to invite India to join in order to balance the influence of China. I cannot exclude this possibility, but the result is that China finally accept this suggestion. Well, what I can say is that China is very confident. China believes it can put the differences between China and India under control, not to affect the further cooperation in SCO.
Analysts say the group will also have to manage tensions between India and its rival Pakistan, who is also a new member of the group. Well, the SCO had originally been formed back in 2001 to address security concerns and what the organization calls the three evil forces of extremism, terrorism and separatism. But analysts I spoke to say the organization is ever evolving and cooperation could increase in other areas as well. This is particularly so on the economic front. After all, the group accounts for nearly half the world's population, 60% of the Eurasia landmass and more than 20% of global GDP. Most members are also part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is expected to feature during the meetings.
One thing is of crucial importance, that they all agree that the best way to fight against the evil forces like separatism, terrorism or extremism is actually to promote economic development, because once the economic development gets off the ground, living standards can be improved, people will have better hope for the future, and they will be more and more tired of war and conflicts, for example. So this will serve very much of a stabilizing effect on these countries and the people in these countries.
Analysts add that with its expansion, the grouping could also enjoy larger influence on global issues. For example, with Iran an observer state of the SCO, the United States' recent move to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal is likely to be discussed as well. Olivia Xiong, Channel News Asia, Qingdao, China.
Now, we apologise for the abrupt loss of Olivia earlier. Now, still ahead, let's give you some other stories making the news this evening. An outbreak of measles has killed dozens of children in Romania, with 200 new cases reported each week. While the highly contagious disease is vaccine preventable, its surge has been fueled by celebrities urging people not to vaccinate their children. Many remain wary of the vaccine, which was once falsely linked to autism. However, the high death rate is causing them to reconsider. More than 13,000 people have now contracted measles in Romania over the past year.
The World Wildlife Fund has warned that the Mediterranean is in danger of becoming a sea of plastic. WWF said the Mediterranean has record levels of microplastics of less than 5 millimeters. It represents over 95% of waste out in the sea, and it can be found in food chain, so thus posing a threat to human health. And to tackle the problem, the World Wildlife Fund has advocated for the establishment of an international agreement to reduce the dumping of plastic waste. And still to come, our Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe gives his wish list to the US President Donald Trump ahead of the summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un.
A reminder of our top stories this hour. In Malaysia, the opposition UMNO's vice president, Hishamuddin Hussein, says he will not contest in the upcoming party elections. He said he takes responsibility for his party's electoral losses in last month's general election, but says he will stay with the party to contribute towards strengthening the party. North Korean leader Kim Jong Un says he's willing to denuclearise. That's according to U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who says Washington and Pyongyang have managed to narrow the gap on denuclearization. He made the comments ahead of the closely watched Trump-Kim summit set for Tuesday. Chinese President Xi Jinping has hailed China's ties with Russia as he treated Vladimir Putin to a state visit to bring the neighboring giants closer in the face of U.S. diplomatic and economic challenges. The two men are the most powerful Chinese and Russian leaders in decades. China is mired in tough negotiations with the U.S. to avoid a trade war. On its part, Moscow has deep differences with Washington on multiple diplomatic fronts. U.S. President Donald Trump has assured Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe that he'll raise the issue of Japanese abductees when he meets North Korean leader Kim Jong Un next week. The abductee issue dominated yesterday's meeting between Mr. Abe and Mr. Trump in Washington. Mr. Abe said that if the abduction issue were resolved, it would pave the way for normalizing ties between Japan and North Korea. He has even offered direct talks with Mr. Kim. Let's join our senior correspondent Michio Ishida in Tokyo for more on this story. And Michio, why is Mr. Abe placing such high priority on the abduction issue? And what else is on his wish list for the Trump-Kim summit?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background. Back in 2002, then North Korean leader Kim Jong Il admitted to the kidnapping of Japanese, and 5 were returned. But the homecomings of the rest have not been realized, and it's believed that there are many, many more kidnapped and left behind in North Korea. Now, Mr. Abe was back then the deputy cabinet secretary, and he accompanied then Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi. So his relationship with the families of abductees go a long way back. And actually, he knew one parent before he was elected to parliament. So his political agenda is to resolve the abduction issue. But it's only in 2014 that he was able to reopen talks on the abduction issue with North Korea. However, Japan slapped economic sanctions after North Korea conducted its nuclear and missile tests, so talks stalled. So this upcoming summit could be the real big opportunity for Japan to reopen talks with the help of Mr. Donald Trump to link Mr. Abe with Mr. Kim Jong Un.
Mitch, you know, you spoke with Masami Abe, the reporter who first broke the news on the abductions. You know, tell us more about that.
Yes, well, Mr. Masami Abe was a reporter with the Sankei Shimbun, which is a major daily. He's currently 70 years old, retired, happy, into farming. Back in the late 1970s, he heard some local reports of Japanese couples disappearing from the area near the Sea of Japan, and he investigated. And he also heard of a couple who was about to be kidnapped. And after he did some studying, he came up with the result that they were kidnapped, or they were about to be kidnapped to North Korea. Now, 2 of the couples were actually returned from North Korea in 2002 with Mr. Junichiro Koizumi. Then he also studied the story about Megumi Yokota, the 13-year-old girl who was abducted in 1978. And he was the first to break the news that she was abducted to North Korea as well. Now, here's more of his story.
1979年の秋ですね、私はまだ31だったんで、駆け出しのまだ記者ですよね。で、警視庁の、まあ、一応事件記者ですね。警備と公安を担当したんですけどね、日本海の方で変なことが起きているという、もうつぶやきですね、を聞いたんですよ。で、だけどそれだけでどんな変なことか全く分からない。一つだけなんだという事件があったんですよ。 それが地元の富山県の地元の北日本新聞の社会面にこのぐらい載ってる記事だったんですよ。それは海岸で安倍家が襲われて、4人か5人組の男たちに襲われて、袋に入れられて、ね、で海岸の松林の中に置かれて、だけどもその男たちは間もなく逃げたと。こういう事件、こういう事件。
In 1980, he produced his first article on a series of mysterious kidnappings in 3 different regions along the coastline of Japan. His article alluded that the victims were targeted to be taken across the Sea of Japan to where North Korea is. His headline reads, 3 couples mysteriously vanish. And the sub-headline asks, is a foreign intelligence agency involved? But Mr. Abe's reporting was largely ignored in the early 1980s. The Japanese public found it incredulous that North Korean agents were in Japan to kidnap its citizens. It was later confirmed that North Korea had used those abducted to train its spies. And in one incident, a North Korean agent who was responsible for blowing up a South Korean airliner in 1987 was trained to speak Japanese by an abductee. The government of Japan has officially identified 17 victims of abductions by North Korea, while hundreds more are suspected to have been kidnapped. In 2002, Pyongyang returned 5 abductees to Japan. Since then, there's been no progress, but their families have not stopped campaigning for their return.
まあ米中首脳会談どうなるかちょっと分かりませんけどもね。まあ最後ですね。日本にとっても多分最後のチャンスだと思いますけどね。で北朝鮮にとっても多分最後だと思いますね。
And to find out more about the abductions by North Korea, now tune in for a special edition of Correspondent's Diary tonight at 9:30 Hong Kong, Singapore time.
Now we have some news just in. U.S. celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain, host of CNN's food and travel-focused Parts Unknown, the television series, has died at the age of 61. That's according to the network that they've said today. That cause of death apparently is suicide. The network said in a statement he was found dead in a hotel room in France where he had been working on an upcoming episode for his program. That's according to the network CNN. We'll have more updates on that as news comes in.
Now, still ahead here on Primetime Asia, and Dawn will be back with a business update now, including Vietnam awarding Singapore's largest clean energy provider a $150 million contract to build the solar farm. That story next.
robust global demand. Beijing's exports in May, they rose over 12% from a year earlier. But the jump in imports is even bigger. Imports grew 26%, both beating market expectations. China had a trade surplus of around $25 billion for the month. That is up nearly 12%. Analysts had, however, forecast the trade surplus to increase to $32 billion in May. The strong trade performance comes on the back of sustained demand at home and abroad. It also lends Beijing's policymakers an edge as they deal with tough trade negotiations with Washington. Now, though the trade row does cloud China's export outlook, as it could disrupt its shipments and supply chains. And even if a trade war is avoided, well, analysts, they expect trade growth to edge down as the global economy loses some momentum. China's soybean imports also leapt in May from the previous month. Buyers scooping up purchases from Brazil's bumper harvest despite market concerns over a trade war. China, the world's top soybean buyer, imported around 10 million tons of the oilseed in May. That's up from April's 7 million tons. The shipments make for the highest monthly number since July. It comes a month after Beijing threatened to levy an additional 25% duty on U.S. soy imports. China imports 60% of the oil seeds traded worldwide, a third of which comes from the U.S. U.S. allies are bracing for a showdown with President Donald Trump at the G7 summit in Quebec, Canada this weekend. Mr. Trump had ignited anger among fellow G7 leaders by imposing those hefty trade tariffs on steel and aluminium. The move has led to the retaliatory measures and sparked fears of a global trade war. Tensions have been ramped up ahead of the summit. Last night, French President Emmanuel Macron threatened in a tweet to exclude the US from a joint statement issued every year. He warned that the other G7 member countries wouldn't hesitate to isolate America over its protectionist policies. President Trump retaliated by directing a tweet at both Prime Minister Trudeau and also President Macron. He accused the US allies of levying, and I quote, massive tariffs and creating non-monetary barriers. A series of one-on-one meetings have been scheduled on the sidelines of the summit. Mr. Macron is set to huddle with Britain's Theresa May, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and Italy's new Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte ahead of their talks with Mr. Trump. The European leaders are seeking a common approach to dealing with the trade issues. Now, as the leaders prepare for their meetings, some 400 protesters marched in downtown Quebec City. The coalition of groups that organised the march say they're protesting the neoliberal policies of the G7 countries. Though the demonstrations have been peaceful so far, rows of officers in protective gear have lined the streets to head off any escalations. More on that story now. India's national carrier says it's seeking an urgent multi-million-dollar loan to maintain day-to-day operations. The debt-ridden airline has invited bids from financial institutions looking for a short-term loan of $148 million. Air India has failed to pay salaries to its over 10 billion employees on time for the last 3 months. The plea for funds was made on Tuesday. Now, this follows just days after a government attempt to sell 76% stake came a cropper last month. The government's move to disinvest didn't get even a single bidder. India's Tata Group, Singapore Airlines and Indigo, they were all linked to a takeover, but subsequently ruled themselves out. Air India was once the country's only airline, but it has lost market share to low-cost rivals. Air India is also about $8 billion in the red, and it reported losses of almost $860 million for the 2017 financial year. In Vietnam, the largest solar energy project to date has broken ground in central Ninh Thuan province. The country aims to more than triple the amount of renewable energy that it produces by 2030. A groundbreaking ceremony was held for this 168 megawatt solar farm with a total investment of $150 million. Tung Ngo takes us through the project.
Electricity generated in this project will be connected to Vietnam national grid when it reaches commercial operation in June next year. And this project is a joint venture of Singapore's Sunsip, one of the largest and most established players in the solar energy industry in the region. The Vietnam government is committed to buy energy from this project or other solar farm projects that are operational by June 2019 with a fixed price of 9.35 US cents per kilowatt hour for 20 years. And this is a key incentive that has attracted many foreign investors into Vietnam's solar energy market.
The Vietnamese government have been looking at the solar renewable energy for a while, in particular solar. The feed-in tariff was announced, but I think there were a lot of interest from all over the world to participate in this feed-in tariff program. In the last couple of years, Vietnam, the economy has been really accelerating. And Vietnam is a very large country, spanning all the way from China all the way down to the south of the peninsula. I think it's important to participate in this economy.
The country's electricity demand is growing at about 10% per year. The government has increased its interest in renewable energy after it cancelled 2 nuclear power plants in 2016 due to economic and financial difficulties. The country's hydropower potential has almost been fully exploited, while its oil and gas reserves are running low amid stalled efforts to tap new fields in the disputed South China Sea. Solar power is expected to become Vietnam's main source of renewable energy in the future, with installed capacity to be increased to 12,000 megawatt, or more than 3% of Vietnam's power generation by 2030. Tung Ngo, Channel News Asia, Ninh Thuận Province.
That's good news for Vietnam and good news for the planet as well.
It certainly is. Many thanks for that, Dawn, bearer of good news this evening. Still to come here on Primetime Asia, good news perhaps for single women in Taiwan and perhaps even around the world, because they're showing you how you can freeze your eggs until you meet Mr. Right. We'll have that story in just a bit, and we'll tell you a bit more about President Trump and Kim Jong Un.
Welcome back to Primetime Asia. And news just in now that U.S. celebrity chef and food critic Anthony Bourdain has died at 61 years old. Now, he fronted CNN's food and travel-focused Parts Unknown television series.
The network said in a statement that the cause of death was suicide. His close friend, Eric Rippert, the French chef, found Bourdain unresponsive in his hotel room Friday morning.
Now, Bourdain had been working on an upcoming episode of his program, and he was also a best-selling food author.
And more single Taiwanese women are choosing to freeze their eggs until they find their Mr. Right. They want to keep the option of having babies despite passing the average childbearing age.
Well, many also come from overseas, as Taiwan's freezing technology is mature, but the cost is low. Channel News Asia's Victoria Jen finds out more.
Miss Liu from Hong Kong is 34 years old, and she has 3 children. But she's chosen to freeze her eggs, just in case she decides to have more babies in the future.
先动起来，然后如果未来真的想要有更多的小朋友的时候，那个胚胎跟我的卵子其实都是很健康的，就不会因为年龄的关系，就会影响到未来可能就会有不孕症啊。
Taiwan has become a popular destination for women home and abroad who want to freeze their eggs. One reason is price. Although the technology is on par with the U.S., the cost is about $3,400, 1/3 that of the U.S. and half that of Hong Kong. About 70% of the women who sign up for the procedure are from Hong Kong, Macau, and China. Currently, China bans single women from freezing their eggs, and married women must get official approval. Eggs are frozen at these liquid nitrogen tanks that are kept at a temperature of -196 degrees Celsius. They can be stored for more than 10 years, and the ratio of eggs surviving the process of freezing and thawing is 90%. Taipei Medical University Hospital is one of some 80 medical institutions that provide egg freezing services on the island.
目前法律的规定冻卵是10年，如果你要延长的话，还可以加合约。但是就技术层面上来讲，你可以冻到100年，保存得当的话都是没有问题的。
But doctors say the key to high success rate of fertilization is to freeze the eggs at an early age.
所以29岁以前冻卵，它的活产率是100%，100%。但如果是35岁以前冻卵，它的这个活产率还是50%。 那如果36岁后冻卵，可能就活产率到22.9%。所以如果到40岁以后冻卵，可能它的这个活产率是 below 10%。
Interest in egg freezing has grown in Taiwan as more women postpone marriage and motherhood. The island has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, and women are also having their children later in life. One sociologist I interviewed, however, expressed concern that easy availability to egg freezing may impact society in the future.
所以未来他要结婚，是不是要结婚，可能就不见得是一个优先的考虑。那所以我刚刚讲组成家庭的这个基本的2个条件，可能就有点会被改观。所以这个过程你会看到是一个完全医学上的概念，而不是一个所谓组成婚姻家庭的概念。所以它很可能会去改变婚姻制度，改变家庭制度。
But Dr. Chen also added that there is no denying that egg freezing provides women with more options and freedom for their future. Although there is no official data for the number of women and who have opted to freeze their eggs, the Taipei Veteran General Hospital says it saw 184 cases in 2017, up from 6 in 2012. The hospital also said that the majority of women who signed up were single women aged between 36 and 40. Victoria Jen, Channel News Asia, Taipei.
The South Korean community in Singapore have begun their own preparations to mark the summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un next week. And Vanessa Lim met up with some of them.
Choi Nam-suk was 15 years old when she found out that her mother was from North Korea. She tells me that her mom, who is now 87 years old, had kept it a secret for nearly 2 decades. Now the family travels to Panmunjom every year, hoping to catch a glimpse of their North Korean relatives. Located in the Korean demilitarized zone, the village is the only place where North and South Korean forces stand face to face. But a historic meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un, set to take place next week, has raised hopes of reunification.
She missed her family so much, and then she tried to find her father and brothers, but she couldn't make it. And now she's very, very touched and couldn't sleep well because of this news.
Other South Koreans we spoke to hope the summit will at least lead to greater understanding between the two Koreas.
What I know about North Korea is all on newspaper or news, but after this summit, maybe we are more familiar with them, and maybe next time I can visit their beautiful country.
And they'll be watching the news with excitement together on the day itself at a gathering hosted by the Korean Association in Singapore. They may even wear these specially designed shirts to mark the momentous occasion.
Everybody in the Korean community is very happy to be a part of this historical event. I believe that it will be a turning point towards peace on the Korean peninsula.
The summit isn't attracting the interest of just the Koreans. With Japan being a close neighbor of the two Koreas, several Japanese we spoke with say their wish is for denuclearization in the Korean peninsula.
A few of my Japanese friends in Japan, they ask me for what they're going to talk about or where they're going to do the summit.
It's a kind of big news in Japan as well.
The summit is set to take place on 12th June.
And that's Primetime Asia this evening. A reminder, you can catch us too on channelnewsasia.com.
And I'll see you in an hour's time for Primetime World. Bye for now.